Hi, Joanna.
Hey, Bob.
How are you?
I'm good. I'm good.
Good.
A warm, sunny day in San Diego.
One among many, I'm sure.
Mm-hmm.
Well, the same cannot be said for New Jersey in the winter, although right now it's not bad.
I'm sorry.
So let me introduce us. I'm Robert Wright of Blogging Heads TV. You are Joanna Brooks, and you teach literature at San Diego State for one thing, but that's not the main reason you're here. The main reason you're here is that you are the Mormon girl, right?
I am the Mormon girl, yes.
You have a website called AskMormonGirl.com. I mean, you are a Mormon, first of all, but you have a website called AskMormonGirl.com, and then you have a book that I'm not totally sure how to because you can read it two ways.
I'm holding up a picture of my book.
Hold it up. The Book of Mormon Girl. I guess that's the way to say it. It's the Book of Mormon Girl, meaning you. But you could take it as the Book of Mormon Modifying Girl, right?
True.
You could be the Book of Mormon Girl, or this could be the Book of the Mormon Girl.
Yes. Stories from American faith.
What's that? Yes. And that. But which is it? This is the Book of Mormon Girl.
Yes, and see, that's a picture of me on the cover as a little girl with my pioneer bonnet on, and I still have it.
I know, you looked very cute.
I still have a bonnet.
What's the deal? Is the bonnet part of Mormon garb or something?
Well, we have these pioneer ancestors. My grandmother's grandmother crossed the plains when she was 2 years old on foot.
Uh-huh.
Her family left the Midwest, left Iowa as Mormon pioneers and came to Utah. They actually settled north of Salt Lake and in southern Idaho, too. But, if there's an ethnic costume of multi-generational Mormonism, it's this pioneer garb. So I have a bonnet. My kids have bonnets.
Really?
Yeah, there's a event this weekend here in San Diego commemorating the Mormon Battalion, which was a really not that exciting military junket some Mormon pioneers did during the Mexican-American War. But there's a San Diego historical site for them. And so we'll all go down this weekend, and I will wear my bonnet with my sunglasses. It's a good look.
I'll bet it is. But your kids only wear these on special occasions. They don't just walk into school in their bonnets.
Are you kidding? No. And I think there are some Mormons who have bonnet shame, but I'm not one of them.
You don't suffer from bonnet shame, so we won't give you any of that sort of counseling today.
No, thank you. I'm good.
So I guess, has this Mitt Romney thing been good for you?
Oh, sure. Yeah. It's been a really interesting time to be Mormon and to be a Mormon writing for the public about our faith. And it's been interesting not only in terms of, coming to terms with how little most of America knows about Mormons, but also I personally had to come to terms with how difficult it is for Mormons to write articulately about our own experience to a public audience. We are, even... I'm in an interfaith marriage. I have a PhD from a major research university. I have a robust professional life that involves a lot of writing and speaking. But, about my own faith, Mormons have been a pretty insular society. Even after out-migration from Utah took place in the 20th century, my grandma came from Utah to Los Angeles, and my family's lived in Southern California for years. But we tend to marry amongst ourselves and talk religion amongst ourselves. And
so there's an actual reluctance to talk to other people about your faith?
Which is really curious given how much proselytizing we do. So proselyting...
I noticed that. A couple of Mormons, a couple of young clean-cut Mormon guys showed up at my door a few years ago, and I just felt so sorry for them. I just wanted to explain to them that, with the demographics of this neighborhood, you guys have got an uphill battle.
Well, there's a move. I hope you were nice to them.
I gotta say, they didn't catch me in a real good mood.
Aww. Well,
I just said, look, I'm happy with my spiritual life. I think you should probably move on to the next household.
Well, that's good. When my brother served his mission in Peoria, Illinois, and he had to tract part of the time in Missouri, and it used to be legal in Missouri to kill Mormons under the Illinois had an extermination order, Missouri had these mobs, and he actually was out knocking in the boondocks one day, and on his trailer door, and someone opened the door and said, "Isn't it still legal for us to kill you?" So,
I did not say that.
You did not say that. But there's actually a move in the church away from door-to-door door-to-door tracting, as it's called. Because,
is there really?
Yeah, because, who goes door-to-door anymore?
Right, exactly. Nobody does anything door to door. It's just strange when somebody knocks on your door.
It's like maybe some canvassers, and maybe people selling magazines in my neighborhood. So there's a move to do much more online, and you can see the church's I'm a Mormon campaign, the Mormon.org campaign. There's even missionaries who get recruited and serve their missions working online, using the internets, talking to people. So there's been a savvy shift towards, using digital, using infotech and trying to reach people where they live now, which is online.
Now, there's a theory I read recently that one source of some supposed antagonism between evangelicals and Mormons is kind of jealousy that because the proselytizing has on balance been so successful, there has been sufficient growth in the Mormon population around the world that some evangelicals feel threatened. Have you heard that theory?
I've heard that theory. The first person I heard that from was my mom, who told me when I was 12.
So it's commonly whispered in Mormon households. They're just jealous.
Well, it's not. I was 12 years old, and the local Presbyterian church had its anti-Mormon message up on its marquee, and was showing this film called The God Makers, which was sort of the best known anti-Mormon film, sort of an expose of all sorts of supposedly creepy aspects of Mormon life. Spooky. And I said to my mom, Mom, I was crying. I was like, Mom, why do they do that? Why are they going to call us a cult? Because Mormons, Christian or cult, that was the marquee. And she said, well, because we're growing, and they're threatened. And that never made sense to me. And it's still, it sort of makes sense. We are a fast-growing church, but the recent studies have shown, by the American Religious Identification Survey, have shown that we're holding steady in the U.S. We're not growing like we did in the 80s and 90s. There's still strong growth globally, especially in Africa right now. But, rates of disaffiliation among young Mormon people actually rising. So we're sort of settling into a more stable place as just a maturing minority faith, rather than this sort of ascendant global force. There's still growth. So I don't know if I totally buy that as what evangelical anti-Mormonism is about.
Well, there could also be, in theory, resentment over the success of Mormons. It's on balance a pretty prosperous and successful group, right? And groups like that have a history of being resented sometimes.
Believe it or not, take away Mitt Romney and, the Huntsman family and their wealth and the Marriotts and other sort of Mormon upper class. And on average, we're pretty average in terms of our wealth. Yeah. Hindus and Jews are the most prosperous religious groups in the United States. Mormons are, middle or below middle. And there are some indications that rates of college attainment are dropping for people in Utah. So it's, the best known Mormons are wealthy Mormons. But there are a lot of very regular people in our church, including a growing number of Latino converts and immigrants who also tend to be more working class.
Well, is it possible that what's actually happened is that because of the influx of people from lower socioeconomic strata, that the kind of average prosperity level has actually dropped over time, and that 30 years ago this would have been a more valid stereotype?
No, actually 30 years ago we were household wealth in Utah has increased faster than national average. I think that was one of the Pew survey findings in the last 20 years. So there is like an upwardly mobile upper middle class stratum that has done pretty well in the last 15 to 20 years. That before that, we were a very rural population. We were rural Intermountain West, people. So I don't know. I think maybe they're jealous, but there's a historian named Patrick Mason who teaches at Claremont University as head of the Mormon Studies program there, who wrote a book about anti-Mormonism in the South. And, he traces it back historically. He talks about how after the Civil War, and at a time when Mormons had this place in the American public spotlight, we were the object of all these reformers movements who were anti-polygamy, especially in the South. Missionaries were met with violence because it was feared that they would come get polygamous wives. So in the same way, post-bellum Southern masculinity was premised on the defense of Southern womanhood, and violence was aimed at African Americans. There was, antipathy towards Mormons too, along the same lines. That's Patrick's argument. Now that makes sense of some of the intensity I see in the South. At least the intensity of the perception of Mormon alienness. Another thing is just that still, even without migration, Mormon population tends to be concentrated in the West, so people in the West just know us. You know, there's more likely to be a Mormon kid at your high school if you're in California, or certainly Nevada, Arizona, Idaho, Wyoming, you know, and less likely to be a Mormon kid in your high school if you're in Georgia or Alabama. So you grow up with us and you know, you see us, you're in our day-to-day lives, and that always, you know, sort of helps tamp down the feelings of fear and resentment. So, go ahead.
But you think the antagonism is sufficiently real that it will be a hindrance for Mitt Romney? I mean, there is enough animosity emanating, I guess, particularly from evangelicals that it's an obstacle?
It was certainly an issue in South Carolina. I mean, I try to be very data-based when I think about anti-Mormonism. Mormons tend to view the outside world as a hostile place in general. Mormons tend to feel misunderstood, tend to feel persecuted. There's a high consciousness of like social snub, social interactions, people telling you you're not Christian, telling you you belong to a cult. So when I approach it, especially when I write about politics, I try to be very, very data-oriented. And we see in New Hampshire that, you know, Romney won among evangelicals. Very different region, very different culture than South Carolina, where Romney really took a beating among evangelicals, you know, at the hands of Newt Gingrich. Even after the coalition of evangelical leaders endorsed Rick Santorum, folks went for Gingrich. So, you know, I don't know exactly what's going on. I've been talking to folks at Public Religion Research Institute and others trying to get them to do follow-up questions. When you ask people if Romney's Mormonism is an issue, try and get them to figure out why that is. Is it something you heard at church? Is it just that you don't like him? And the fact that he's a Mormon is this sort of alien feature you can hang that on. Because he has a problem connecting with voters, especially working-class voters. Big problem. Patrician, Yankee wonky, not going to do well. Not going to do well among born-agains in South Carolina and Florida. Not at all. And the easiest label for that is, oh, he's Mormon, I just don't trust him. So.
Yeah. Now, whatever the actual source of, you know, whether it's resentment, jealousy, whatever, you know, people do come up with rationales for disliking groups or wanting to keep their distance from them. And there is a claim among Christians that Mormons don't deserve to be thought of as Christians, whereas Mormons do think of themselves as Christians, right?
Right.
Now, what are the most commonly cited doctrinal differences to use to justify the exclusion of Mormons from the Christian circle?
Usually, there's some technical theological aspects. You know, Mormons have a different concept of the Trinity. We think of Jesus as like the literal begotten Son of God. So God the Father and Jesus Christ being two different personages would be a Mormon term that sort of bashes against or clashes with more orthodox Christian view of the Trinity.
So but, Jesus is not literally divine in Mormon, he is not identical to. He's divine, but he's not God per se. There is a difference.
He's God. He's God, and he's God in human form. So,
he's God in human form.
Yeah.
Then what is the what? I don't get the distinction between that and Christian doctrine.
Well, where it really comes from is that, I mean, that's the dummy. That's one of the proxy, you know, arguments that we have a different concept of the Trinity. Where I think it really comes from is two things. When people say that you're a Christian, you know, oftentimes that term, especially, for example, as it's recited in, you know, the Nicene Creed, you know, I believe in the one, you know, the Catholic sense of Christendom, you know, and Mormonism is certainly rooted in American Protestantism, but it's heretical. It's utterly heretical, and its beginnings in many ways mark a break with Christendom, you know, this Catholic notion of Christendom as being part of this larger family, you know, for example...
What's the heresy? When you say it's heretical, what is the original heresy?
We have this entirely different book of Scripture called the Book of Mormon, which, you know, Joseph Smith, you know, according to the history, Joseph Smith, you know, dug up and translated, and so that's a pretty big one. The belief in continuing revelation, so for example, that Mormons have living prophets, and that, you know, the leadership of living prophets has been a part of our, you know, church since the 1830s, since its founding. That's also deeply, deeply heretical. So there's that we're a very heretical break from this Catholic sense of Christendom, Catholic with a small c, sense of Christendom. The other thing I think that's at work is Mormon theology is extremely innovative. In addition to, and that wars against how Protestantism and most forms of Christianity have worked in the U.S. In modern times, in the 19th and 20th century. So, for example, there's a very conservative instinct that most Christians have. Either you want to be doing pretty much what the church has always done, or you want to do even less in the case of fundamentalisms. You don't want to do scholarly interpretation of Bible. You want to stay, very close to the bone, very close to human experience, close to the spirit. So theological innovation runs counter to everything in American Christianity, not for Mormonism. It's been an incredibly innovative faith. And it's developed a whole set of religious ordinances beyond baptism that take place in Mormon temples that are a part in the Mormon worldview of, going to heaven. These are necessary ordinances to go to the highest levels of heaven. And that kind of innovation is also viewed just as not Christian. Anything beyond the basic idea that if you're baptized or if you confess the name of Jesus Christ, that you are saved, is also reason for Christians to view us as not Christian. What's this whole other layer of stuff that you guys have invented? And so that rules us out of Christendom.
Although in that regard, there actually are differences between Catholicism and Protestantism. I mean, Protestants don't have a notion of purgatory, right? So there are intra-Christian differences once you start articulating the various layers or levels of afterlife, I guess, in that sense. Yeah. But you guys go a lot further. It sounds like you've got like a multi-tiered thing.
We have a multi-tiered heaven and no hell. Fun fact about Mormonism.
Well, that's nice. I didn't know about that. Sign me up.
There's no hell in Mormonism.
I should not have turned those 2 Mormon missionaries away at the door.
There's hope for you yet, Bob. There's no hell. Even if you're a coffee drinker, you still go to heaven.
Well, that's important in my case, but so wait a second. No, really, we have to get clear on this. So what is the worst thing that can happen to you in the afterlife if well, of course, I mean, you might say in Christianity there's no hell in the sense that if you're truly a Christian, you get to go to heaven. I mean, is that what you're saying, that if you're truly a Mormon?
No.
You're just saying hell doesn't exist. You don't think that non-Mormons go to hell?
No.
Excellent. I mean, so that's good. That's good news for me. I don't actually have to sign up.
No, you're fine. God loves you.
Thank you.
Yeah, no, there's a place called Perdition, but only about 6 people go there. It's a very strange place. Like Judas might be there. I
probably know some of them.
But no, you really don't. Like really, really bad folks, they go to the Celestial Kingdom, which is what it's called. And Joseph Smith said that if we could see the Celestial Kingdom, the lowest level of heaven, we'd kill ourselves to get there. So it's
so this is almost so wait. He believed that everyone, Mormon and non-Mormon alike, goes to some level of heaven, except for these 6 really horrible people.
It's just like think of it as a grading scale, an A, B, or a C, right? There's people who are going to get A's, they're going to go to the highest level of heaven. There's people who are going to get B's, they're going to go second highest level of heaven. They're still good, and then there's people who just kind of going to get C's, but they're still all right. They still pass. They go to heaven.
So this is almost a doctrine of universal salvation.
Yes, it is. It's universalist.
And, of course, we know what happened to the Universalists. They became the Unitarian Universalists and are off in this. And Christians, I think the average Christian doesn't accept them as part of Christianity.
Right. But there's a fierce perfectionist streak in Mormonism. Fierce perfectionist streak. Because no one I go to church with wants to get a B. Everyone wants to go to that top layer. Because it's there where families stay together forever. So that's one of the innovations of Mormon doctrine Mormon theology is that people stay married through the eternities. Parents and children continue in parent and child relationships through the eternities. And that family closeness, that tie, only stays preserved when you go to the highest level of heaven in Mormon theology. So, people really want to get an A. But everyone's going to be fine.
You mean if you want to stay together with your family, you have to live in the afterlife, you have to live a really good life?
That's it.
So, I'm not going to be seeing you in the afterlife. Because I mean, as a non-Mormon, I'll be in heaven, but...
Well, I don't know where I'm going either. Jury's out on me. I'm a mess.
I have a lot of confidence in you.
I don't know. I'm a Democrat and a feminist, and I don't know. Some people
I didn't know about that.
Oh, come on.
And how do you feel about gay people?
Oh, my goodness. Oh, well, yeah. You read the Book of Mormon, girl. It's all in here. No, I'm a stone-cold Democrat. I've been an LGBT equality activist. Mm-hmm. I'm a feminist, and I'm married to a Jew. So...
Ooh.
Jury's out on me.
Yeah, the jury is out. Now, is that a common view within the church that, I mean, they would actually, there are people that actually cite things like that and say that that's relevant to the level of salvation you get? No.
Well, no, because no one wants to be a jerk, you know.
Right.
But Mormons also have this eternal view. Mormons are pretty nice people on a day-to-day basis, except for when they organize against, for example, marriage equality, in my view, which is not so nice. But, no. No one would, I mean... Sometimes writing on the internet, I'll get people who will say mean things to me about, you know, me not being orthodox enough, basically, and being an apostate. And so in anonymous circumstances, people might say that to me. Because the internet's a cruel place anyway.
It is.
But, no, not on a day-to-day basis. There's just, the day-to-day ethic of Mormonism is love, love, love. Now, you know, family members might get anxious if you are an unorthodox Mormon. You know, there are some people who make unorthodox choices or, you know, tell their family they may not be a literal believer anymore, and they can experience some pretty hardcore family rejection. But, you know, Mormons are supposed to take an eternal perspective on things and trust that God's going to work it all out in time, and we're all going to end up at a very happy place. That's a sort of Mormon outlook.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now, is the basic threshold for, well, there isn't a basic threshold for salvation in the sense that there is for much of Christianity if there's no hell, but is a kind of prerequisite for doing very well in the afterlife, and indeed a prerequisite for considering yourself a Mormon, that you accept Jesus Christ as your Savior? Is that kind of language the same as in Christianity?
Yeah, you don't hear that particular phrase, but, you know, the notion of salvation by Christ's sacrifice is pretty fundamental to Mormon doctrine, so...
Okay.
Yeah, but they say it would be more ordinance-based, so you have to be baptized, and you have to go to the temple. You have to, and to get into the highest levels of heaven, you're going to have to be temple married.
You're going to be, what does that, that means just...
You have to marry in a Mormon temple. Or if you aren't alive, you know, that's why Mormons do a lot of proxy work for their deceased ancestors. So people who weren't, so for example, my ancestors who were still in, you know, Spain in the 17th century and had no access to Mormonism, my mom has looked them up and made sure they're all taken care of, you know, so that they can...
Okay, and what is it you do exactly for the sake of ancestors? I mean, what things you do for them to ensure that they get access to heaven, even though they didn't fulfill the technical prerequisites?
And I just want to say these are all like very orthodox views. I'm presenting sort of the orthodox narrative.
Yeah, you don't necessarily accept every single orthodox view.
Well, I tend to be a non-literal believer, so I believe there's something. I believe there's something, and I've experienced what I consider to be something inspired in my life, and I've experienced in the context of Mormonism. I don't know if I can say I believe every Mormon doctrine literally, but you know, I respect them all, and they make up my sort of spiritual worldview, my spiritual alphabet, my lexicon. So you know, there are very literal believers. You know, I'm certainly someone who will profess belief. Maybe not as literal as other people. So, but I'm presenting a very kind of standard orthodox narrative of Mormon theology, just because it's the clearest way to go ahead. But, yeah, no, salvation happens in groups for Mormons. You know, you don't go to heaven alone. You go as part of a family. Which is a beautiful concept to me. I mean, I love this idea. No one just gets in by themselves. We all sort of go in together. So there's a lot of beauty in that. If you like your relatives especially.
By behaving in a way that merits access to, say, the highest level of heaven, you're actually doing your children a service and your relatives a service.
Yes.
And what specific thing? So you mentioned being married in a temple. Is it a few specific kind of ritual prerequisites, or does it have to do with the way you live your everyday life? You know, is it more kind of karmic? You know, or both. You know, so what kinds of things should you do in your everyday life if you want to get to the highest levels of heaven?
You know, some just basic ethical living. You know, Mormons would describe it as keeping the commandments. So, you know, sexual purity, you know, service to others, charity to the poor, honesty, treating your neighbors with kindness and love, treating your families with kindness and love, being honest in all your dealing. You know, those are the basic ways Mormons, and, you know, and also observance of sort of Mormon-specific behavioral guidelines. We have the Word of Wisdom, which is a chapter of one of our books of Scripture that talks about no coffee, no tea, no alcohol, you know, and has been interpreted to include no drugs. So, you know, that's where that comes from.
Yeah, that's serious, right? Like you don't drink Coca-Cola even.
Oh, I grew up. I had my first caffeinated Coke when I was 20 years old.
Wow.
And but you know, Coke has Coke is interesting. When I grew up, Coke was a little more, in my household, I was raised very devout. In my household, Coke was a no-no, but now a lot of Mormons drink Coke. You can't buy it at BYU. You can't buy caffeinated Coke at BYU, but a lot of Mormons do drink it, yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Is there a Coke coffee distinction?
Yes.
So coffee
no.
would be really going overboard.
Coffee would be bad, but here's the thing. Mormons drank coffee until the 20th century. The word of wisdom was, yeah. Some did. I mean, Brigham Young drank, it's just sort of a matter of historical record. The word of wisdom it happened in the 1830s, but it wasn't sort of enforced until the 20th century. And scholars who look back at Mormon history say it's because it was one of those dividing lines between the inside and the out. So when we abandoned polygamy, how else were we going to mark ourselves as being in versus out?
Oh, right? Interesting.
To seek a new defining orthodoxy. So now, these days, being observant of the word of wisdom is very important to Mormon identity, very important definer of in and out.
Wow.
Yeah.
So, when people... There is a sense of mystery about the religion that may be attributable partly to the fact that non-Mormons are not allowed inside the temple, right? I remember when my daughter went on when she was one of my daughters was very young, as part of the school curriculum, they went and visited these various houses of worship,
Right.
Synagogues, Buddhist temples. And it was only the Mormon temple where they didn't get to go into the actual temple.
Right.
And I assume, first of all, there's like a rationale for that. It doesn't actually strike me as that odd for a religion to have certain places that are exclusive in that sense, but I assume there's an official rationale.
Yeah. No, and it should be clear, the places we go on, where we do our Sunday worship is not the temple. There's regular sort of brick meeting houses everywhere in the world where anyone can go on Sunday and, and go to a regular Sunday service and go to Sunday school and, see many Mormon children running around and crying during service. Just like regular everyday worship happens in chapels where everyone is welcome. The temple is reserved only for the most observant members of the faith, and it's where this whole other set of ordinances, as we call them, take place. Marriages, proxy work for ancestors. And it's also sort of just a profoundly reflective space where people go and have a real break from the outside world. You change your clothes when you attend the temple. You change into all white clothing. This is not a secret. But, and so there's this, it's beautiful inside, it's peaceful, it's restful. So it's a special zone for very observant members of the church.
Now, is the white clothing the same as the underwear thing, or is that different?
It's different. Oh. You would only wear your white clothing when you go to the temple.
Okay.
But, the underwear is something
we'll come to the underwear later then. But as for the temple, you're saying some Mormons are not, some Mormons themselves are never admitted to a temple?
Yes.
Huh.
Yeah.
And what do you have to do to qualify? What kind of observance?
You need to pay your tithing, 10% of your income, as we all know Mitt Romney does. You need to be honest in all your dealings. You have to maintain, chastity or fidelity in marriage. You have to maintain, keep the word of wisdom, the dietary codes. You usually hold a calling at church. You do a responsibility. You have a job at church and you do it. And you profess, support for church leaders and a belief in basic church doctrines. So there's a standard interview you go through in order to qualify for temple participation. You get a little card,
and is it too personal a question to ask whether you've been admitted to temple?
Yeah, no, I don't attend the temple. I'm not. That's not something. It's a personal choice, and so I'm not. I don't consider myself a highly Orthodox Mormon, even though I'm a believing Mormon. So no, it's not part of my religious life.
I see. And is access to the temple correlated with level of heaven that you might have access to?
It's true. Yeah. Yeah. It's true. So I could just be a B. I could be a C.
You sound to me like a B plus at least.
We'll see. What life is long. Who knows?
I'm optimistic. Yeah, that's the other thing. It's not too late to gain admission to the temple.
Oh no.
Now it is said. I think, in another source of kind of suspicion from some Christians, it is said that kind of strange things happen in the temple. I mean, are there indeed rituals that would strike Christians as strange, or is this just a function of them not having access to the temple?
Well, I really can't talk about what goes on the inside for lots of reasons. First, because I haven't been. I mean, I know Mormon culture very well. Lived in Mormon communities my whole life, so I know. But, it's also sort of a space we don't really talk about lately. But from what I know and what I understand, if you went to a Masonic lodge and saw some sort of Masonic ceremony with, handshakes or, everyone bow at a certain point in the narrative, you'd be comfortable with what went on in a Mormon temple.
Okay. Now, as for the underwear, I mean, this conversation would not be complete if we did not address the famous underwear.
Everyone's got to know.
Right. I'm sure this is not the first time you've been asked.
No.
What's the deal with the underwear? First of all, what exactly is the underwear?
A great article, a journalist named McKay Coppins, who writes for BuzzFeed now, who is Mormon, just this week wrote a really good straight-ahead article on garments, as Mormons call them. When you go to the temple for the first time and you become sort of a temple participating Mormon, sort of a fully adult Orthodox Mormon, you make a promise that every day under your street clothes you're going to wear this ceremonial clothing. It's going to remind you of your promises. So you're not going to wear it on the outside. For example, like if you compared it to another Orthodox strain of religion, so for example, an Orthodox Sikh who commits to wear a turban every day, or an Orthodox Jew who commits to dress in a certain way on the outside, or shave your head and wear a shtitel, or, the observance is not on the outside, it's under the street clothes, which is very interesting, very different, but it's Orthodox expression, So you wear this underwear, and basically for men, it's basically like a white cotton. You can get other fabrics too if you live in some subtropical place where you want to be more comfy. White cotton t-shirt and, the equivalent of boxer briefs, and women sort of a white camisole and, sort of a tap pant or a longer sort of, underwear bottoms. And they just remind you of promises you've made every day. First thing you put on in the morning reminds you of these promises you've made to live a life of service and chastity and honesty. So
it is something that not all Mormons would do, but the ones who do it would do it every day?
Yeah, wear them every day, except for when you're working out. You're going to go swimming. Don't wear them to the beach. It doesn't make sense.
Yeah. So it's comparable to garments that people in other religions wear, except in a certain sense less, showy. I don't want to put the other religions down, but
right.
But that's kind of the idea. It's not an advertisement. It's a reminder to yourself.
Yes, that's it. It's just a promise. It's like a promise that you're carrying around every day and you're wearing it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, what? So you were brought up in the Mormon Church. What? And I'm sure some of the beliefs you were inculcated with are different from the ones I was inculcated with when I was brought up as a Southern Baptist, and some of the rituals were different. When you're talking to say the average Christian, what is the story you could tell about rituals you participated in or beliefs that you imbibed that would most freak them out?
Let me see. Good question. Well, because I don't mind horrifying people. I think it's funny. I think it's
this is your opportunity.
Yeah,
horrify them.
Well, polygamy. It's interesting. I read just last week. I finished this book that was about the seating. I'm going to take a little detour. I'll come back. I promise. The seating of the first U.S. senator who was Mormon. His name was Reed Smoot, senator from the state of Utah. 1903 was when he began his term.
Is he the Smoot of the Smoot-Hawley Act?
That's the guy. And there was a 4-year national show trial about Smoot's beliefs when he was seated, because he was, it was a question whether he was fit to serve, because it was rumored that he was polygamous, or that leaders of the church continued to practice polygamy even after the church had officially renounced polygamy in 1890. And so polygamy is still, it's an amazingly potent subject for American people. So, if we wanted to, I was raised with, there's still an open question, especially among Orthodox Mormons, about whether the highest levels of heaven will in fact be polygamous. And it's not something that's openly talked about at church really anymore, but it's something people sort of carry around, especially Orthodox people. Oh my gosh, am I going to have to share my husband when I get there? And so, talking about that idea, that doctrine, and how alive that was for me growing up is a story I can tell that will always get a horrified response from friends. The idea that, oh my gosh, people still might believe in polygamy. That's a huge marker of Mormon difference still to this day.
Now there's a in the description of your book, there's a reference to something about being brought up to think of angels standing by your bedside or something, which actually, that doesn't strike me as unchristian. I mean, that doesn't strike me as that strange, but it sounds like you thought of that as distinctively Mormon.
People who study Mormon doctrine too, or study Mormon culture, talk about one of its features being this sense that the supernatural and the natural, the divine and the everyday, are powerfully interconnected. And Mormons use this term, the veil. The veil is thin. So the idea that, there's a veil between this world and the next, between the everyday temporal world and the spiritual world, and that veil is very thin. And that, there are people on the other side of that veil. Mormons often talk about ancestors being on the other side of the veil, looking after them. And it's one of the most beautiful aspects of Mormon culture. I was raised with this very live sense of my ancestors being invested in me and present. And that's distinctive to Mormonism. And so, the angels that stand at our bedsides are oftentimes, our relatives.
I see.
If you come from that kind of a family that has a tradition of talking about your ancestors, being involved.
So there's a sense of the presence of your ancestors. And is there a broader sense of the world being, I don't know what to say, not enchanted and not magical, but you know what I mean, right?
Yes, powerful. Alive with power. Mormons, priesthood, lay priesthood. Mormonism has a lay priesthood. So priesthood is not just something that a few trained clerics hold and administer on behalf of a congregation. Every young man at the age of 12 is ordained into a level of the priesthood and has the power, for example, to, bless the sacrament on Sundays. We take a white bread and water sacrament, how American. And that priesthood is, in Orthodox households or observant households, a father could lay hands on the head of a sick child and offer a healing blessing. And so that sense that, the power of God is very available and very proximate. If you live worthily, it can really play a role in your day-to-day lives, that you're entitled to, there's a robust tradition of prayer. You talk to God and get that input, that dialogue in your everyday life. It's very alive in Mormonism.
And even that is not that different from kind of mainstream Christianity. I mean, there is this idea that God's power is accessible through prayer. I think there is a sense in Christianity maybe that, it's a little bit of a crapshoot. I mean, you say your prayer and you never know, whereas maybe it's more like in the Mormon faith, the laying on of hands, I don't know, you tell me, is more likely to work?
Well, Mormons have pretty refined ways of talking about it. I mean, there's an understanding that no human will supersedes the will of God. That maybe one of the benefits of using priesthood blessings or using priesthood power or prayer is that you can be more discerning of the will of God, as a force, and learn how to work in cooperation with it. No one bosses God around in Mormonism.
but is there a sense as you walk through the world of, the divine presence in kind of everything, like nature itself being animated in a divine way?
Yes, less so with nature, but deeply so with interpersonal relationships. Like you'll often hear Mormons talk about, I felt a prompting to talk to so-and-so. I felt a prompting to, call my friend and, see how she was doing. And it turns out she has sick kids and she really needed help that day. So I went over and helped her. Right, that would be like a paradigmatic Mormon expression of how enchanted our social relationships are and can be with divinity.
And is the prompting characteristically just kind of an intuition as opposed to, say, seeing a sign? And I don't mean a sign in the sense of a vision. I mean a sign in the sense of maybe hearing a song on the radio at a particular time and attributing significance to that.
Right. So you would hear, the really Mormon phrase is we talk about the Holy Ghost as being a still small voice, right? So you would hear a little voice that would say, why don't you, call Sister Jones and see how she's doing? Or why don't you go this way rather than that way on your way home from work? And sure enough, you see someone who's broken down, who needs some assistance on the side of the road, and clearly you're supposed to help them. So, yeah.
But it's a voice from within.
Voice from within. Usually, there are people who have pretty spectacular spiritual experiences. That may be a part of Mormon tradition that's receding in some areas. I think it's a lovely one. Our ancestors had some pretty dynamite. There's a lot of wonderful visions, revelations, kind of experiences recorded in Mormon journals over our generations. So, but nowadays, most people would just be a still small voice.
Well, that seems kind of appealing.
Yeah, it's nice. It's worth sticking around for, I think.
Yeah.
For me,
Yeah. So, and that is not especially dependent on being Orthodox, as you are not. I mean, that part of Mormonism isn't necessarily correlated with Orthodoxy.
Well, it depends on who you ask. I mean, certainly, if you want to be, the way it would be talked about at church or among Mormons is if you want to be entitled to have that experience, that ability to discern, you need to be living a good life. You need to be fairly observant. There's emphasis sometimes with the word of wisdom on, not drinking and smoking and not drinking coffee so that you're clear enough, you're physically clear enough. You don't have other stimuli happening so that you can dial in and really listen to the Spirit and the promptings. So, yeah, there's a sense that if you're living right, you're going to, be more entitled to get that kind of direction. But it doesn't necessarily mean you have to be utterly Orthodox.
Now, the church is associated with being very conservative on some social issues, gay rights, and some other ones. I mean, first of all, is the church itself moving a little along those dimensions toward a more moderate position, or at least in terms of how overt its own official activism is?
Yeah, there's been some moderation. We haven't seen in the last few years the sort of concerted effort we saw in California in 2008 where, entire congregations were mobilized as precinct walkers and conference calls were scheduled with high-ranking church leaders and church members to elicit, five-figure donations in support of Proposition 8 against marriage equality. We haven't seen that level of organization since 2008. The church is still clearly invested in anti-marriage equality politics, but you'll hear it phrased more as a defense of its own religious freedom. There's a very common narrative that circulates in Mormon communities that the legalization of gay marriage will negatively impact the right of the church to perform temple marriages according to its own doctrine, which is not welcoming to gay and lesbian people. So, that's how it's phrased. And most legal scholars would say that due to religious freedom clauses, that would never be the case, so it's not necessarily a good narrative, but that's how Mormons do talk about it. But no, we have signs, though, of moderation on other issues. About a year and a half ago, the church came out with the Utah Compact sort of in response to, as a measured, pragmatic, humane alternative to Arizona immigration policies, the draconian SB 1070, which were authored by Mormon legislators like Russell Pierce, and the church that has a significant Latino population, said, actually the church, supports comprehensive immigration reform that creates pathways, and supports the reunification of families, So there's lots of evidence that the church is interested in participating civilly and on matters of conscience in ways that are pretty moderate.
And is it? I mean, it does seem a little ironic in view of some of the conservative history, the socially conservative history of the church, that Mitt Romney and John Huntsman, the two candidates until recently, they were both candidates on the Republican side, were really thought of as
the most moderate
moderates.
Guys in the race.
Yeah.
It's not surprising to me at all. I mean, really, you will find uber conservative, hardcore, Mormons. They tend to talk more like Rand Paul. The church is not in favor necessarily of abortion rights, but that's not a huge issue for Mormons necessarily. Mormons tend to be anti-abortion, but the church doesn't go crazy on social conservative issues, except in this case on the LGBT equality issue. And it's really, Mormons are pragmatic above all. As a minority faith, pragmatism has been one of our hallmarks, getting along with our neighbors, making it work. So I'm not surprised. It was not surprising to me that the two most moderate candidates in the GOP race would be Mormon.
And there were some questions early on about how committed a Mormon John Huntsman actually was, right? He almost, for a while, tried to foster questions, I think.
I know. It's such a bad episode. Because he's so Mormon. He's so ethnic Mormon. He's so multi-generational Mormon. His family is legendary. Come on. He's pioneer stock on all his lines, which to us, all his ancestors are, deeply embedded in the history of the church. So he is Mormon. But, he's like a Jew who eats bacon and goes to shul twice a year. That's still okay. Still but that's an interesting thing to say. First of all, to say when you ask how Mormon is somebody, you look at their ancestry, which in most of Christianity you would not do. And it's interesting that you make the comparison with Judaism, because in Judaism, it's not just a question of belief. There's a more ethnic component of Judaism. So is Mormonism a little like that? Yes, it is truly profoundly among lots of not with everybody. There are lots of converts, but for people with pioneer roots, for people who can trace their family back a few generations in the church, Mormonism has ethnic features. Actually, it's listed in I think it's the Harvard Encyclopedia of Ethnic Groups. So there's an ethnic sensibility to Mormonism. We have very strong kinship networks that link people. We all go to Brigham Young University, serve your mission, live somewhere in the Mormon culture region, and you are profoundly connected within what feels like an ethnic community. So Huntsman's an ethnic Mormon, no question. And what's really interesting heading into the 21st century as we kind of settle into what I think will be our identity as a sort of a stable American minority faith, is whether this sense of ethnic belonging will keep people attracted to and sort of, pinion to the tradition. Will this serve as a point of connection over time for people? Well, even as orthodoxy may come and go, but will you always be able to feel Mormon across the various phases of your life cycle?
I would think the tension would be with between that, the ethnic identity and how actively you proselytize,
right,
and recruit, because Judaism is pretty ethnic, and although they do accept converts, they don't by and large aggressively proselytize,
right,
the way Christians do.
Right.
So Mormons are alone in kind of having it both ways.
Well, and there's this fascinating dynamic too, because there are multi-generational Mormon communities in places that are not Utah. For example, the South Pacific, Tonga and Samoa have like a quarter of the population of Tonga and a third of Samoa is Mormon.
Really?
And and there are Polynesian Mormon communities that have migrated to the U.S. and Polynesians are sort of a part of the Mormon ethnic landscape, but they have their own sense of Mormon ethnicity and tradition, and they sort of claim the pioneer heritage too. So, in church magazines, we'll get pictures of pioneer celebrations in the South Pacific where folks just they're wearing their pioneer bonnet, as sort of a gesture of humor and respect for the historical roots of the tradition, even though it's not their own ethnic stock, right? So there's a way in which this ethnic notion of Mormonism can be grafted, right? That you're a pioneer, wherever you are, because you're going to start sort of this intergenerational tradition of Mormonism in your own sphere.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, this has been fascinating. I would actually like to talk further, but this is we're trying to keep these things
watchable.
Yeah, watchable, exactly. So maybe we'll continue the conversation.
That'd be fun.
Down the road. That would be a lot of fun.
I'm going to show my book one more time right here.
I was going to say, meanwhile, show your book one more time.
It's a memoir. If you want to know what it's like to grow up Mormon, this will tell you.
Yeah, and judging by the conversation, I'm sure it's an interesting story.
Well, hey, Bob, thank you very much. I enjoyed it.
Thank you. So did I.
Okay.
Take care, Joanna.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.